All right, let's talk about the stimulus for this Tuesday, June 2nd. Hard to believe we're already in June, and we thought that this would be the month that we would turn the corner, but that's not the case. We'll get to reopening here in a moment and the economic impact of not being able to open stores, given the fact that we're now having windows smashed and employees scared to go to work. We'll get to all of that, plus the president's remarks last night. A lot of people not happy about what unfolded in Washington, D.C. last night, and the governors are fighting back against the president. It looks like a lack of leadership across this country right now. A lack of leadership at the top, a lack of leadership in the bottom, a lack of leadership in the middle. So what to do? And how are we going to get a stimulus push through when we're facing all of this economic upheaval? We'll get to that. So first, let's talk about the stimulus, where things stand right now. And the reason that I believe the Federal Reserve is our, it's like Star Wars, help me Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're our only hope. I feel like the voice of sanity through this entire crisis, the voice of expediency of getting things done through this entire crisis has been Jerome Powell at the Federal Reserve and the members of the Federal Reserve, shoring up, making sure that Wall Street is doing fine, making sure that the banks are still able to lend. Otherwise, we would have an absolute collapse of the banking system if people weren't able to lend, get mortgages, go out and buy homes right now, be able to continue to put money into the system. And that's what the Federal Reserve has done. They have over the past few weeks been calling for additional direct payments. They said, look, we can't really tell Congress what to do because Congress is in charge of us, but we're basically telling you, right? If you read between the lines, we're basically telling you in multiple interviews, a 60 Minutes interview, of course. You remember when Jerome Powell was on 60 Minutes just a short time ago, and he said coronavirus is hurting those least able to bear its burdens. He said it then, he's saying it again now. He came out in an interview just over the weekend saying in a town hall meeting with Princeton, he said, the people that will be hurt the most are those at the bottom. We're already seeing it. We absolutely need to take action because those are the individuals that are being crushed. He said, if you were someone who made $40,000 or less annually, the chances of you being laid off in the last month or so approached 40%. He also said that women, I didn't know these statistics, that women in the low-paid service sector jobs are one particularly vulnerable group. He said almost 40% of those people have lost their jobs. Those women in the low-paid service sector jobs. He said female workers account for over 55% of the more than 20 million Americans that lost their jobs in April. So women are disproportionately being crushed by this economy than men. And they're making up under half of the country's workforce. So in the hard-hit retail industry, for instance, women represented 61% of losses last month. So again, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell saying those least able to bear its burdens are being hurt disproportionately right now, and called once again for those members of Congress, and he had to be very careful about how he phrases it, to get payments into the hands of the American people, another direct stimulus payment into the hands of the American people. Now, we're also hearing from the Federal Reserve Chief in Minnesota, Neel Kashkari. He said the worst is yet to come. Now, he said over the weekend, so he's echoing what Jerome Powell is saying, so we have two fronts now. We have two fronts on the Federal Reserve side, basically calling on Washington to get its head out of the sand and get direct payments into the American people's hands because the worst is yet to come. Listen to Neel Kashkari of the Federal Reserve.
If this goes on for a long period of time, I think it's going to go on in some phases for a year or two. I think Congress is going to need to continue to give assistance to workers who've lost their jobs. I mean, as you said, it's really around 24% of people right now who are out of work today. And if this is a gradual recovery, the way I think it's going to be, those folks are going to need more help. Yeah, and the worst is yet to come on the job front, unfortunately. And then it really is going to be, as these states start to reopen and as businesses start to reopen, obviously we need them to reopen safely.
And also echoing the sentiments that the states and local governments need help now. That it's not just the American people, that these state and local governments, these services, the police force, the fire departments, those unemployment offices that have been overwhelmed, that have not been able to get stimulus payments and unemployment benefits out to those individuals because they've been overwhelmed. And now, of course, it's the first of the month, the second of the month, when we're really going to start to see the crushing blow of this thing. I think June, was shaping up to be the month where the bottom falls out because of evictions, because of mortgage payments. We heard from one person just now in our chat that just said, I'm a renter, I'm continuing to pay my rent, but my landlord has stopped paying their mortgage. What am I supposed to do? What are you supposed to do? How is this happening in America? How is this happening in the quote-unquote greatest country in the world, where our most vulnerable citizens right now, those that are renting, those that have lost their service sector jobs, are absolutely being crushed? Now, a landlord has no mortgage forgiveness. I don't know why they maybe haven't taken it up on a mortgage forbearance program, why that person hasn't reached out to their bank to say, look, I am being crushed right now, but if you, the renter, are still paying your rent, that's going to go to help pay that mortgage. So that's mind-blowing to me. But to not have a rental assistance program in place right now, which is sitting on the desk of the Senate. Now, Bernie Sanders was asked about what parts of the HEROES Act he would support. Okay, remember, the Senate is back in session now. They are back from their little vacation. So this week, we're actually seeing movement from the Senate to take up the stimulus. Now, I was worried because of all the protests. We saw, obviously, all the people pouring into the streets. The cities are ablaze right now. Washington, D.C. is absolutely ablaze. Would we see, the Senate sitting on its hands waiting before it would take up this kind of action? No. In fact, they are actually taking this up. They are actually starting to dissect this, and maybe some pieces of the HEROES Act will come to the fore. So Bernie Sanders was asked about this and whether or not he would support certain pieces of the HEROES Act. He said yes, huge pieces of it he would support. Now, we don't know exactly what pieces, and frankly, at the end of the day, we need a lot of Republicans on board for any part of the HEROES Act to get pushed through. So what is in the HEROES Act? This is passed by the House of Representatives a few weeks ago before the Senate went on vacation. $100 billion assistance for rental assistance, $75 billion for mortgage assistance, almost $1 trillion in there for state and local governments to keep running that are basically going bankrupt right now. Another round of direct payments to the American people in the form of a $1,200 check plus $1,200 for each dependent, right? That's part of the HEROES Act. Plus there's all of these other pieces in the HEROES Act that goes to help Native communities, Native American communities, goes to help Puerto Rico and Guam and other U.S. territories. There's a lot in this bill. It's massive. It's over $3 trillion. Senate Leader Mitch McConnell has said nothing over $1 trillion would be passed. We'll see if that has shifted at all and if there is a movement towards direct payments. We now have heard from Senator Lindsey Graham, Senator conservative from South Carolina, former presidential candidate. I've interviewed him 50, 60 times in my career. He's no easy cookie on this. He now says he believes we need a direct payment to the American people that's continuous, like an American paycheck. That's coming from Republicans now. So I think in the past few weeks, something has shifted. Now, I thought maybe, and maybe these protests are, making these Republicans nervous because they were all banking on this idea of reopening, getting back to work, reopening. And right now is when the bottom is going to fall out. Jim Cramer, I think, said it well last night on CNBC as I was watching, and I wanted to play this sound from you because he's looking at the markets. And right now, when you look at these markets and you think, like, what is going on here? Why is the stock market up right now amid all of this craziness? And a lot of that can be explained away simply by saying that there's algorithms, there's computer algorithms that are very dispassionate. Like they're not really looking at like minority communities being set aflame, unrest, people being crushed and upset right now, devastating riots across the country, communities torn apart. The market doesn't look at that. The market's a computer system. It's looking at the algorithms, the minute-by-minute trades, and that's what it's reacting to. And a lot of it was hedging on reopening, getting us back to work. And that's what Jim Cramer saw last night. He says, the market is up, but this could be the next week or two when the bottom falls out. Listen to what Cramer had to say last night. I thought it was enlightening.
But we got to get those businesses open. Small business much open because the money's going to run out soon. And we got rent due. Everybody's got rent due. And I know your first 2 months, you said, all right, hey, listen, they got my deposit. I'm okay. I mean, this is the month where they come after you. And I think that this is the month where you got to have cash come in. So that was what I'm still looking at. I'm totally conscious that my heart is with anyone who protests peacefully, because there seems such the inequalities are pointed out once again to all of us, which is necessary. But this was supposed to be the week that we found out how potent America really is when it comes to business, and I hope that doesn't go away.
Yeah, this was supposed to be the week when we got back to normal, or at least in large part. Saw an enlightening interview last night with Tom Colicchio, of course, top chef, Tom Colicchio, restaurateur, one of the great chefs in this country. He's opened so many restaurants. He's tied into this entire food chain. And he says it's been just an absolute mess of leadership, a lack of leadership at every level. And he was specifically talking about the food chain in this country. And I had no idea, and I want to share this with you because I thought it was enlightening. He talked about how you have two different food chains in this country. The food chain that goes to the restaurants and the food chain that goes to grocery stores. And the food chain that goes to grocery stores is not set up to go to restaurants, and vice versa. The way that it's processed, the way that everything is packaged and processed, it's totally different. And if we had some sort of a plan in place to keep that supply chain running, we wouldn't have farmers being crushed, having to throw away or euthanize hogs, throw away eggs, dump potatoes. That if we had a plan in place at a national level, we had actual leadership in this country, we could have had a plan where we could have taken that excess food and converted restaurants that were closed, that couldn't serve, and converted those into food pantries. So you could take the food that you would normally serve at these restaurants, and Tom said, look, I can take this food and make great meals for people. It wouldn't have been like the haute cuisine that you're used to making. It wouldn't matter. They would all be serving as like food pantries to keep that supply chain going. Make sure that those farmers are still being paid for that food so that that supply chain could sustain this pandemic. I thought it was brilliant. I had never heard this. But he said, you know what? Certain states have done this. They took the initiative and did this. Gavin Newsom in California had the wherewithal to put some of these things in places to protect California farmers. Why do we not have that at the national level? And so then President Trump and these want to attack certain governors and back and forth like babies crying at a nursery school. That's what it is. While we're all sitting here on fire and burning right now, it's a total lack of leadership. And so you've had governors had to take things into their own hands to get things done, like Gavin Newsom, who had to set up some of these food pantry programs to keep some of these farmers sustained, be able to pay the food chain. We saw what happened in Nevada and the casinos, right? Pig farmers and others that were relying on the food that would come from those casinos, the excess foodstuffs that would come from those buffets and things like that would have been then shipped at a discount to those hog farmers for food. Well, all of that collapsed. The casinos closed. That food that those hog farmers were relying on collapsed. Those farmers belly up, for lack of a better way of saying it. And you have a collapse of our food structures in this country. Beef prices going up. I mean, it's a failure of leadership. And look, we had plans in place to know that these sorts of things could come. Under a pandemic, what do we need? We need food and shelter and healthcare services to protect us. It's not that difficult to see the top three things that we needed in place, and we didn't. We didn't have proper testing, we didn't have proper food supply, and we didn't have adequate resources to make sure everybody was taken care of. It's a failure of leadership, and it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing when you look at other countries right now. So in the Senate, let's get back to the Senate. What will they do? Well, Bernie Sanders is calling once again for a recurring check. Now, he is the senator who put forward, along with Kamala Harris and Richard Markey, the emergency money for the People's Act, which would be $2,000 per month in the hands of the American people for the rest of the year. He renewed that call again yesterday for a direct payment into the hands of the American people. You have Kamala Harris and Markey also saying the same thing. Now, he even said, look, I'd be willing to say, look, we don't need 2,000. If 2,000 is the reason you're freaking out, let's look at 1,500. So he's even willing to concede, let's go down a little bit in price. We don't necessarily have to be at 2,000. Let's be reasonable here, but let's get it done. And there's mounting pressure right now for a recurring payment. If you listen to the Federal Reserve, if you listen to Neel Kashkari of the Federal Reserve, you listen to Jerome Powell of the Federal Reserve, you see what all of these other countries are doing. We need a direct payment in the hands of the American people. So the Federal Reserve, honestly, has been the sort of knight in shining armor through this whole thing. Can they save us? And that's the great question that I'm wrestling with today, because again, they only have borrowing power. They only have the ability to inject money into the banks, to keep the liquidity going. But there is some word that they have overstepped their bounds before. Could they overstep their bounds again and set up a Federal Reserve bank account? Now, this has been floated in the halls of Washington over the past few weeks. I brought you that here on the show. What if the Federal Reserve was able to issue a debit card, a Federal Reserve bank account to you, the American people, and they would fill it with $2,000 per month until this crisis is over? They could do it. They have exceeded their authority multiple times during this crisis. They're buying up junk bonds and things that is outside of their constitutional authority to do. They're doing it to protect Wall Street. They're doing it to protect the banks. They're doing it to keep the liquidity in the economy flowing. Could they not also write a check to the American people once a month? Take on this burden if Congress won't do it? At this point, there is no way. If you had to ask me, Clayton, would you bet everything that you have that the Senate and Congress will pass another stimulus? Yes. I would say 100% they have to pass another stimulus, and they will. With everything that's going on right now, and the Republicans are tying their hopes and dreams to reopening, and then we see this. And we see this. Here are the numbers this morning. The U.S. economy faces a long recovery. Experts say it could face up to 10 years for us to get back to normal. I'm going to go through some of the indicators here as it relates to these other countries. I'm going to go through some of this latest data. U.S. quarterly economic output isn't expected to catch up to the previous projections until the end of 2029. Folks, I've said it before and I'll say it again, this is a Great Depression. I mean, we are having an exact repeat of the Great Depression. 1929, the wheels fall off, the whole 1930s up until World War II. A lot of people said, well, thank God we got out of this because of all the programs we put in place, infrastructure programs and other things. But most economists agree that the thing that got us out of the economic depression, the Great Depression, was World War II. What got us out of it was World War II and the mobilization of America. That's what got us out of the Great Depression. So here we go again, another 9-year period, 10-year period of depression. So the forecast is 2029 before we recover. If we don't have something in place soon to get a stimulus in the hands of the American people, it could be even far worse, according to the Congressional Budget Office. Their analysis came out that showed that factories in the United States and abroad continue to reduce their output and shed jobs in May, though the pace of the deterioration moderated as we started to ease some of these coronavirus restrictions. But still, US, Asia, Europe saw that a big decline in global manufacturing is starting to come to the bottom. We still have low US sentiment, negative sentiment right now, suggesting that any recovery could be months away, any sort of like small recovery. And of course, we have all of the violence and all of the outcry of these systems and communities saying enough is enough with this violence in our country. What will these protests do? What will a further lockdown do of these restaurants? You realize what a cornerstone these restaurants are, shopping in these communities to kind of get back to some semblance of normalcy. But forget just that part of it. What if we can't pay the rent? What if we can't put food on our tables? What if this continued supply chain problem continues to hamper our food supply, where we can't get meat, we can't get vegetables, we can't get potatoes, we can't get milk, we can't get eggs? I mean, it is a Great Depression, folks. We can parse it all we want. We can try to pretend that this is not a Great Depression. We can try to say that, oh, well, a Great Depression is a sustained number of job growth or unemployment for a number of months. But with projections like this through 2029 and 40 million people out of work, you can call it whatever you want. And a lack of stimulus money in the hands of the American people, there's no way that these state and local governments are going to be able to get more money in their hands to be able to pay firefighters, to pay police departments, firefighters, schools, municipal services, picking up your trash. These places are going bankrupt right now. And it comes down to the Senate. It comes down to Mitch McConnell and President Trump. And there's a lot of criticism of President Trump this morning for what unfolded yesterday. I'm sure you saw it. And as we try to look at reopening, here's what, we are in the worst civil unrest since 1968. There's been more arrests, more civil unrest since 1968. You know what happened then, of course, in 1968, when cities went up in flames over the assassination of Martin Luther King. Really? Like in a few short weeks, this has happened again. A pandemic, civil unrest at levels we haven't seen since the 1960s. We're living through this right now. We need leadership. So yesterday, there's quite a bit of criticism this morning all over conservative blogs. This isn't liberal blogs, this is conservatives pointing out what the president did yesterday was people are angry that he used this one church as a prop, held up a Bible. When reporters asked him, is that your Bible? He said, it's a Bible, not my Bible. But so there are Episcopalians who are upset and furious that he used the church as a prop. And more importantly was this scene unfolding as they were walking from the White House over to the church. I'm sure many of you saw this. There was a lot of peaceful protesters hanging out in the park. Peaceful protesters who were there legally. They weren't breaking the law. And as the president walked, there was outrage over the way that the law enforcement around there fired tear gas into the crowd to move them away from the president as he was making his way over to the church. Like, what kind of a country do we live in? I mean, this is something you would see in like Venezuela right now, or, frankly, China, right? Law enforcement using tear gas on citizens to move them out of a park peacefully, who are there protesting the way that the government is handling not only the violence at police departments, but also pandemic response. I mean, where are we living? It's just sobering. There's a Caitlin Collins from CNN right there in the red. Know her, trying to speak to the president, trying to get answers here. And then nearby in this park, these protesters are gassed. Being told to move in a public park. You got to get out of here. The march is on. Move out of the way. Is this America? Oh, it's just frightening to watch this unfold. I mean, this is one of those moments in a presidency right here, don't you think? You have those moments of a presidency where you have George W. Bush at September 11th standing there at Ground Zero with a megaphone showing leadership. One of the speech that just sent chills through my spine when he did it, to the people that tore these buildings down. We hear you, we see you and we're coming for you. The whole world hears you, to the firefighters that are chanting USA. And then this moment, like this chaos. And this is America right now. I mean, what did you guys think when you saw this? And then hear the news last night about the move to put the move to use armed forces if these governors don't impose some sort of martial law themselves, that he will use the U.S. military to descend and to break up these protests, I guess peaceful or not, walking the streets of the United States, armed guards. It's absolutely terrifying. So this is where the coronavirus, according to the CBO, forgetting what we're dealing with the protests right now, it's going to cost the economy nearly $8 trillion. $8 trillion to get us out of this. $8 trillion for us to be able to fight this. That's 3% through the fiscal year 2030, according to the CBO. And Senator Chuck Schumer said the estimate shows how important it is for us to get this next rescue package passed as soon as possible. And remember, think about the GDP, right? The GDP, the gross domestic product, is driven by you and me. And it's set to be down about 15%. That's enormous. When normally 70% of that money is driven by you and me, by putting money into the economy. 70% of it. And now we're going to be saddled with this lack of revenue. So state and local governments, tax revenue from going out and shopping, grocery shopping and other things, going to stores, restaurants, all of that's down, which is exactly why we need another program set in place by the federal government. There is some, look, I am optimistic that you have Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell. He's like the one in our corner right now, saying we need this. He also spoke about the Main Street program, which is should be rolling out any day now. That's incredibly important. So this Main Street program is to help those small businesses that weren't helped really by the Paycheck Protection Program. A lot of small businesses that just got crushed weren't able to keep their overhead or pay their overhead and their bills because the PPP was so focused on payroll, when many of them have less payroll than they had overhead and had to close and say, bye, I have to fire you because I can't pay the overhead. So the Main Street program, loan programs would encourage loans to these small businesses to get them back on their feet with zero interest payments so they could sustain this thing for the next few years. So this was slow to roll out. There has been criticism of the Federal Reserve because this was slow to roll out over the past few months. It was approved back in March, but because there were all of these issues implementing it and trying to identify where these businesses are that are hurting, I've talked about it before. They did an amazing job, the Federal Reserve, trying to track down where these businesses have been hurt because they don't have access to them. There's not like a central email like server that the Fed can just send out an email to all of these businesses. Hey, are you one of those businesses that are hurt right now? They don't have access to that. So what they had to do was go to local leaders in all of these different counties and try to find out, hey, is the local hair salon going under? What about the laundromat? Who are those owners? Have them contact you. Have them be made aware that they can have access to this Main Street loan program. So they did all of these listening sessions, really try to get in contact with these local leaders to try to help them. And Jerome Powell was like on endless conference calls with state and local leaders trying to identify businesses that are being hurt because, as he says, they are the fuel of the economy. If small businesses go under, we all go under. The collapse of small business in America would be devastating and would end us. And it kind of feels that way now, doesn't it, folks, that we are on the precipice of something new and different. Like that the American government, the American economy, this is one of those moments when we face a collapse like this that Jared Diamond writes about in his seminal book, you should all read it, called Collapse. Like what leads to the collapse of governments? He predicted that this would happen, by the way. And all of the signs are there. And we're sitting in it now. So I want to hear from you today. How are you feeling about this? Are you encouraged at all about some of the movement by the senators calling for this additional program, $2,000 a month or less? They're willing to concede. We don't have to go $2,000. We'll go $1,500 per month through the end of the year in the hands of the American people. Let's do it. Let's do it now. I am encouraged by the Federal Reserve pushing on this. I do want to play Neel Kashkari's sound again for those of you who joined me late, because I think what he's saying, he is a Federal Reserve. He's a member of the Federal Reserve, of course, and he is saying that we need direct payments into the hands of the American people. And also Congressman Jeffries of New York wants swift action. So there is pushing right now, pushing from certain members of the government. But here's Neel Kashkari. He's been outspoken about this out of Minnesota, Federal Reserve member, and here's what he had to say. Take a listen.
If this goes on for a long period of time, I think it's going to go on in some phases for a year or two. I think Congress is going to need to continue to give assistance to workers who've lost their jobs. I mean, as you said, it's really around 24% of people right now who are out of work today. And if this is a gradual recovery, the way I think it's going to be, those folks are going to need more help. Yeah, and the worst is yet to come on the job front, unfortunately. And then it really is going to be, as these states start to reopen and as businesses start to reopen, obviously we need them to reopen safely.
As if we're not already in the worst. We know that the worst is yet to come. We had all of these people telling us that June and July were going to be the worst. Well, we're here, but we also didn't anticipate national protests because of violence at the hands of police departments and the outrage, and just enough is enough of people feeling powerless and wanting to tear down these failed walls of this institution that seem to serve billionaires but don't seem to serve the American people. When these millionaires can go on vacation in the Senate and enjoy their Mai Tais on the beach, and all of us are sitting here wondering, we've had these shows every day where everyone's asking, well, I'm glad the Senate is on vacation. We need to vote them out. I'm glad they're enjoying their time off. Why don't we ask them to give up their salary while we're sitting here waiting for them to do something? I mean, the outrage right now is palpable. Absolutely palpable. So thank you so much for subscribing. If you're new here, please do hit that subscribe button. We do these shows every day. We try to empower you with your money to make sure you're aware of what's going on in the economy, kind of cut through all the smoke on both sides, Democrats and Republicans, and bring you what we know to be true about what's going on in this economy so it affects you and your family's wallet. So you can keep more of your own money. You can be smarter about getting out of this federal government economic system and into things that can produce monthly cash flow like real estate, gold, and silver, things that are separate from this crazy $8 trillion. I mean, look at this. That's how much it cost us, $8 trillion, according to the CBO, and we're not done yet. Where's this money coming from? Well, we're printing it. That's where it's coming from. So if your money is tied to this, we teach you here on the channel to not have it tied to this. So go ahead and subscribe. Now I want to open it up to some Q&A and see how everyone's doing today. Thank you, Jessica, for your $5 super chat. I appreciate that. Barbara Jones, thank you for your super chat. Says thank you so much for being here every day. My pleasure. Michelle, thank you for your super chat. Yolanda Thompson, thank you for your super chat. John Shanks, thank you so much for your kind super chat as well. Very, very kind. Irene Groves says, thank you for your super chat. We need another check because I'm on disability and make enough just for my rent, and they took my food stamps, so now I can't get food. Oh. You know what Tom Colicchio said last night? How many of you know who Tom Colicchio is? Do you ever watch Top Chef on Bravo? One of my wife's favorite shows, and she got me into it years ago. He's a bald-headed chef. He's a brilliant chef. He's one of the best in America. He was interviewed the other day, and I thought his interview was just so powerful. And he was talking about that he hopes that we have more empathy in this country now. And I do too. I was so much in agreement with him on this, that he said, for a long time, it was very easy for people to feel separated from the food stamps program, right? The SNAP program. Be like, oh, I don't need that. I've got a job. I'm over here. I'm a different kind of a person, right? But guess what? It affects so many people, and they're all like us. We're all intertwined. And he said, what I hope happens is that during this pandemic, that during this lockdown, that the people who felt like they were separate from or better than someone who might be on food stamps somehow, now, because he said, look, there's a lot of people that are now having to apply for the very first time for food stamps, for the food SNAP program, because they're now out of work. So they're now, for the first time, having to fill out this application, and they're like, oh my God, this is what it's like? And I always think of this, right? If you're an old white guy in Congress, and there's a young black man who sees his community destroyed by violence every night, and you pretend like you understand what he's going through, it's so out of touch, right? But until you are touched in some way and affected by it personally, very often people aren't moved. right? I think about, remember Nancy Reagan, remember stem cell research, remember when that was a thing? And remember stem cell research was so controversial at the time, of course, right? And you had conservatives that were staunchly opposed to it until Ronald Reagan got Alzheimer's, right? And suddenly now we knew someone who was affected by it. And Nancy Reagan comes out and says, I support stem cell research and science. And you had so many Republicans suddenly say, oh, okay, Nancy Reagan, okay, yeah, now I can see that, right? But it's very easy to, I don't know, I think in some ways it can be easy to be homophobic if you've never met a gay person, right? You've never had someone whose life has been affected by violence. It's very easy to be removed from it and live in a bubble. So for you to say about your food stamps, Irene, I feel for you. You know, there are so many people now who are going on the SNAP program for the very first time who maybe thought they were above it until they weren't. And now I hope, to Tom Colicchio's point, that we now have more empathy in this country because more people are hurting and we now are able to see what that hurt feels like in a way that maybe we never have before. And that's where empathy can come from. You know, once you are forced to walk in someone else's shoes, I think. That's why it's so easy for people, keyboard cowboys and couch potatoes, to sit back and complain about the protests when their communities have been fine for years with no violence, you know. And so I think we're at a tipping point here. This is a tipping point. +10. I'm not pandering to anybody, but I think it's very, like, I don't pretend for a second to know what it's like to grow up in the black community. And I said that in my video last night. You know, you can pay lip service to wanting to be empathetic towards it. You can want to open yourself up to it, but you have to be real and say, look, there's no way that what I've ever gone through in my life could ever compare to what you've gone through, right? It's impossible. I grew up with no money. I grew up with very little money, but I also had the advantage of my skin color in a way that other people don't. And I'm aware of that. If you're not aware of that, then you're just ignorant. You have to be aware of that. And it's unfortunate, but that's the reality. For those people to just ignore it as if it's not real, it's just garbage. I'm not pandering to anybody. Yeah, you've got idiots out there like, all lives matter. Yes, they do, but what you're missing is the point. All lives can't matter if those people who are being hurt on a regular basis don't matter. It's an ignorant thing to say. I can't stand when people say it. Thank you so much. You're very sweet. Anthony W. said, I'm black and I want you as president. You have a catering heart. Well, thank you so much for that. But you know, what I want is for us. Look, we've had all these politicians that have been in there since I was a child. I mean, I remember reading about some of these politicians when I was growing up in social studies. They still have a job. They become so entrenched in this, you know, Mitch McConnell and others, they become so entrenched that they lose touch with everything. They lose touch with why they ran perhaps in the first place years ago. You know, they were called to action because of something in their community that called them to say enough is enough, right? And maybe for Mitch, it was like high taxes. Maybe, who knows, right? But certain people have a call for civic duty in that way at that time. And they've gotten so far removed, and now they're so entrenched in like a bureaucracy and lobbyists lining their pocket that they've totally forgotten why they got in there in the first place. That's why I'm a huge supporter of of term limits. But we absolutely need fresh blood. We absolutely need fresh blood in Congress. And this is an opportunity. I hope all of you, all of you watching right now, vote. And I'm also so upset about this idea of the mail-in ballot being a problem. Do you know that I'm sure you know, but we've been doing mail-in ballots since the Civil War in this country. And we've never had an issue, okay? Almost 1 in 4 Americans has voted by mail-in ballot since the Civil War. How many members of our military vote by mail? And plus you go through sorting machines that sort them digitally. So when you want to make this argument that we have never had election problems before because we've always had these electronic ballots or we've always had punch cards, do you remember 2000? Do you remember those jackasses sitting there with a magnifying glass looking at hanging chads in Florida? I mean, how ridiculous is that to say that you couldn't trust a mail-in ballot and yet we've been doing it since the Civil War? That's just garbage. Don't fall for that line of reasoning. I would encourage all of you who are scared about going to the polls, call up your state, request a mail-in ballot. I did. Request a mail-in ballot. They will then send it to you. You can print it out yourself, do it yourself, and send it back to them. Members of the military have been doing it for hundreds of years. You can too. Members of our embassy, members of our foreign service all around the world have been doing it. Don't fall for that. It's time to shake things up in this country and get these people out, get these bums out of there. Good, yeah. Little Abner says, I vote by mail. Yeah, how many people here vote by mail? I do. Esther Porter says, I'd like to see what the politicians should be forced to live like those of us do at the below poverty level for just 3 months. Could you imagine? Could you imagine? Just imagine for a minute if President Trump had to live like you below poverty for 3 months. Imagine if Mitch McConnell had to live like you below poverty for 3 months. Imagine if Nancy Pelosi, quite frankly, the San Francisco Nancy Pelosi had to live like you below poverty for 3 months. It'd be fascinating to watch, wouldn't it? Let's create a reality show called Congress goes to poverty. Scott W., thank you for your super chat. When is the hyperinflation? It's a great question. When you have these types of numbers right now from the federal government, it's going to cost the economy nearly $8 trillion. Where are we getting this money? Where are we getting this money? I don't know. But right now, the Fed and their wizardry has managed to keep inflation rate around 2%, which is where it's been and where they want to keep it at. They're wizards over. I don't understand what the Fed is doing. I know that they do. And that's why I'm saying I feel like these guys, Jerome Powell right now is like our knight in shining armor. He's been calm, cool, collected, and decisive in making sure that the bank, what he's able to do. I mean, he's limited in what he's able to do, but he's basically done everything he can. So if there's one person right now who I'd be applauding in all of this, and look, he's not perfect. I'm just saying if there's one person who's been decisive in all of this, I would say it's been him. Barbie Haverson gave a nice super chat. Thank you so much. She said, my husband is a double amputee and had a heart attack on Saturday. Oh, bless your heart. And he's bleeding internally. I've lost my job and I've kept our bills up, but we're broke and I never got my first stimulus check. Oh my God. Barbie, can you please set up a GoFundMe on here and send it to me? And on tomorrow's show, we'll do what I can. Our audience will do what we can to help you. But in the meantime, for your first stimulus check, please, please, please go over to irs.gov and check on the Get My Payment Status tab. There's 2 reasons you need to do that, okay? There's 2 reasons today that you need to do that. Number 1 is it will show you the update, where it is in process. Number two, if they've tried to get it out to you, mail it to you, or went to an old bank account and it got returned, they will have an update in the account that shows that they tried to get it out to you, they couldn't because of an old bank account, and now it had to be sent back. Okay, so they will update you on that. That's what the IRS is telling us this morning, that those two reasons are why you need to go check that Get My Payment Status update on their website, okay? Very important to do. But if you would, please set up a GoFundMe account, okay? And then go ahead and send it to us here tomorrow. You can drop it right here in the chat, and then we'll include it in tomorrow's show and try to see if we can help you and your husband. And please give him my love, and our audience as well, I'm sure, is thinking of you. Jose Gonzalez, thank you for your super chat. I'm a new subscriber. I've been watching a lot of your videos. Thank you so much. I agree with everything you're saying and your views. Dan Arganbright wants to know, what are my thoughts on 401k withdrawals to pay off your mortgage? I think it's fantastic right now, although I wouldn't necessarily just take it out to pay off your mortgage because interest rates are so stinking low. Two things on that, okay? Number one, if you've got a 401k, I would consider taking that money out because under the CARES Act, you can now without a penalty. Take it out, roll it into real estate, roll it into something stable, like real estate investing, gold and silver, okay? So you're now allowed to take out up to $100,000 in your 401k without, if you're able to show, because of coronavirus, the CARES Act allows you to do that. It used to be just 50. So at our company, at Morris Invest, we've been working with a lot of clients that are rolling over their 401k into a self-directed account and then buying a property. So that's one option that you can do. Second option is to roll that over and buy precious metals, right? Buy gold and silver. Get it out of the crazy stock market. Put it into more tangible, sustainable assets. You could look at paying off your mortgage. Is it strapping you? Like when you look at your house payment that you've got right now, are you able to refinance at a much better rate because interest rates are so low? Is there a big disparity between what your current rate is and what it is today? Like it's at what, 3.9% or 3.2%? Are you at 5%? Then it might be worth doing a refinance, okay? But I wouldn't take, my personal view, I wouldn't take all of that 401k money and pay it towards a mortgage payment, okay? I would use that to start creating monthly cash flow in the form of real estate investing. You know, buying a property that now is a hedge against inflation helps you to get monthly cash flow. You get the benefits of depreciation on your taxes. You basically get that full amount of a down payment back on your taxes. So I would seriously be looking at that. If I had that kind of capital, I would be looking at doing it that way. That's just my advice, Dan. Again, I'm not a financial advisor, but if you're asking me what I would do if I had a 401k, that's what I would do. And that's what I did do. So I'm speaking from experience on that. Do you remember pregnant Chads? Yeah, I remember remember that? In Florida, the pregnant Chads, of course. It was ridiculous. So you mean to tell me, this was what, I couldn't believe it. This was like my civics lesson in 2000. I was a political reporter at the time for CBS News in Montana. And I was covering the governor of Montana, Mark Roscoe, who was George W. Bush's first choice for Attorney General, you remember. He turned it down because his wife, because he had been governor for 8 years in Montana, and the governor's wife said, it's either the job or me. I've had enough of politics. I want time off now after 8 years of you being governor. So he turned it down. Nevertheless, of course, we had the whole recount in Florida, and it was a total disaster. So everyone wants to make the point about mail-in ballots as being fraudulent. That is absolutely, it's absolute garbage. So you had these idiots with a magnifying glass looking at a punch ballot that someone would punch, right, with their pencil tip or whatever it was, right, in that little machine when you were voting in Florida. And clearly the person had punched that particular spot because there was like a pencil mark on it, right? But it wasn't fully ripped off, so it was just hanging there, right? So those didn't count. Like hanging Chads didn't count, really? You couldn't tell that person's intent? Talk about fraud. Then a pregnant Chad, so a little old lady went to go punch it and she didn't push it all the way through, but you clearly saw that it was pushed, but it was pregnant, but it wasn't pushed all the way through. We can't count that. Sorry. So don't tell me about we've got a secure system. I mean, how many other countries, Estonia, other countries can do it electronically by mail and have a much more secure system than we do? It's ridiculous. Vaskin der Bogajian, thank you for your super chat. You said, my commercial tenants stopped paying rent. How do I pay my mortgages? Property tax, insurance, basic maintenance. What happens to the value of my property where the cap rate is close to zero? Vaskin, you bring up a great point. I mean, I am not a commercial property investor. I invest in residential property, which is 4 units and below. But commercial property, you're right, is tied to the value of the cap rate, meaning the amount of rent coming in. And if you have no rent coming in, the value of that property drops to basically nothing. Because as an investor in commercial property, if I'm talking to you about buying this property from you, I'm going to look at your pro forma, I'm going to look at the amount of rent roll. I don't look at comparables in the neighborhood. That's not how commercial investors do it. They look at the amount of money that you're making from the tenants in the property. My heart goes out to you. I mean, have you had the ability right now to, or have you talked to your mortgage lender about a forbearance program to get through this? Have you been able to take advantage of the Main Street program that the Federal Reserve is rolling out? Are you able to, if you own the property as a business, able to take advantage of the PPP loan program to get through this? But again, this is what's, this is what's so troubling to me, is that you have all of these other countries that have done it so much better than us. And they saw all of this coming. So they put protections in place for mortgages. They put protections in place for rent. They put protections in place for paychecks going out to those individual citizens. They subsidized wages. Well, Kiki Mad says not a good time to invest in real estate. The thing is, though, like where we're building our properties in West Texas and other places, we've had a 100% collection rate on our properties. So, work very closely with our property management companies, and we invest and build properties in areas that are tied to the local healthcare system, hospitals, schools, universities. Those people haven't lost their jobs. And so because of that, if you invest in smart areas, then you can become what CNBC called recession-proof cities. Now, if you're an investor in San Francisco or New York or Miami, my heart goes out to you, because now we're seeing exactly what's unfolding in those areas. And with so many people working from home and maybe never going back to working in an office, commercial real estate in those towns is going to be massively set back. Rents in those ridiculously overpriced areas are going to be massively set back. San Francisco is going to be hit tremendously hard. Those prices were way overinflated to begin with. And now, if you find out you're in Silicon Valley and you don't have to drive 2 hours to work at the Twitter headquarters in downtown San Francisco, and you can avoid all of that nightmarish traffic going over the Bay Bridge, and you can stay home and work from home like Twitter just announced, who's going to rent a $4,000 per month apartment in downtown San Francisco when you can live out in the mountains, in the beautiful mountains, and have quiet? I mean, it's a no-brainer. You're right. Kelly K says other countries are laughing hard at the United States right now. They absolutely are. Well, thank you guys for joining us today. Levi Matthews, I appreciate your super chat. Thank you guys. I've got a conference call here in a few minutes, but I want to read Levi's super chat here. Senators and representatives will not do anything until they exhaust everything stupid to arrive at the position of common sense and do the right thing. It will become too late. Yesterday on the show, I mentioned Winston Churchill's famous quote about Americans, right? That Americans will tend to do the right thing when all other options are exhausted. That's Winston Churchill the genius Winston Churchill, right? Americans will tend to do the right thing only when all other options have been exhausted. I think we're nearing that point right now, when all other options have been exhausted. My thanks to all of you. We'll see, unless we have some news out of the Senate later today, which I'll bring you if we do, and any updates that I think are relevant and not wasting your time, I will do that. Otherwise, we're here every morning at 9 a.m. Eastern time, so if you're new here, please hit that subscribe button and hit that little bell notification so you'll be notified when we go live. And you know, we'll bring this show to you every day to the best of my ability. Much love to all of you. Grover says much love to you as well. Don't you, buddy? He's waving goodbye. Grover says much love to all of you. And goodbye to all of you. All right, everyone, we'll see you tomorrow or later today. If we have any news worth bringing you out of the Senate or in this economy, I will bring it to you. Much love to all of you. We'll see you a little bit later.